Hello, everyone. Welcome to the University of Maine Cooperative Extension's Preserving the Maine Harvest webinar. Thank you for joining us on these educational adventures that are designed to correspond with what's growing in your garden and what you'll find available at your local farmers markets or farm stands. With the growing season well underway here in Maine, we've got your answers for how to preserve these foods safely. Our webinars provide guidance according to the USDA recommendations for preserving foods at home. I'm Kathy Savoy, and we will also be joined today by other colleagues, Lisa Fishman, Lori Bowen, and Kate McCarty in the demo kitchen. The mission of the University of Maine Cooperative Extension is to help Maine people improve their lives through an educational process that uses research-based knowledge focused on issues and needs. Our educational programs include agriculture, horticulture, including the ever-popular Master Gardener program, 4-H youth development, food safety, nutrition, and food preservation. We'd like to find out from you, what are the ways, if any, that you've connected with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension in the past? We're going to launch our first poll to find out all the topics you've connected with us for educational support. You can see the poll, and if you could please select as many as apply to the different ways that you've connected with UMaine Extension. And we'll give you just a few more minutes to make your selections. And then we'll go ahead and share those results. And you can see that it is home gardening and food preservation, food safety, and nutrition are the most popular ways that people have connected with us for our educational events, information, and programs. Please know that we will also be sharing links to all of the UMaine Cooperative Extension resources via our website at the end of this webinar. It's a surprise to a lot of people, the depth and breadth of the programs that UMaine Extension has to offer. Today, we will focus on ways to freeze different kinds of fruits that are grown in Maine, and then also discuss ways to use your frozen fruit. So get ready for tips to improve the quality and also to maximize the flavor of the fruits that you're freezing. Before we dive in, some housekeeping. We have our webinar set up so that you can hear and see us, but rest assured we cannot hear or see you. However, we do want to be able to field your questions, which you can do by simply typing your question into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will get to those questions throughout the presentation. And if for some reason we don't get to your question live, you'll be getting an email from Lisa Fishman within the next few days with an answer to that question. So again, thanks for joining us, and let's get started with today's topic with Lisa Fishman.
Thanks, Kathy, and welcome everyone. 'Tis the season for many Maine-grown, delicious and nutritious fruits. Right now, we've got an abundance of fruits available, from plums and raspberries and peaches to early apples, high bush blueberries, and tasty wild Maine blueberries. Freezing is one of the most simple, most convenient, and least time-consuming methods of preserving foods that there is. So let's get started with a demonstration video on freezing raspberries, including how to make a low-sugar jam.
Hi, I'm Kathy Savoy, Extension Educator with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. Summer is at its peak in Maine, and today we're going to talk about how to use fresh raspberries. Raspberries, whether from your own backyard, your local farmer's market, or farm stand, are vitamin-rich and fiber-packed. Freezing is a simple, inexpensive, and quick method of food preservation. Why not take advantage of those raspberries when you have a bunch of them available so you can have access to them later on in the winter when local raspberries are no longer available. You do not need to pack your raspberries in a sugar or syrup solution. Materials to freeze in need to be moisture vapor resistant, very durable and leak proof, and not become brittle and crack at low temperatures. You want to protect your foods from developing off flavors or odors and make sure they're easy to seal and easy to mark with the date and label. With clean hands, clean equipment, and a clean work surface, you're ready to start. Raspberries are very perishable and need to be eaten or preserved within 2 days of picking. Raspberries should be of best quality at optimum maturity and freshness. Sort raspberries to remove any spoiled or crushed fruit. Rinse very gently under cool running water. To improve the quality of your frozen product, remove water by spinning in a salad spinner, placing on paper towels or clean towels. Remember, excess water creates clumped berries that are hard to break up and use. Pack into freezer-grade material, leaving headspace for expansion that occurs during freezing. Label, date, and freeze in a freezer set at 0 degrees or lower. Keep a thermometer in your freezer and check the temperature frequently. Remember, berries should be used within 8 to 12 months. A tray pack is an alternative that may make raspberries easier to use later on. Simply spread berries in a single layer on shallow trays and freeze. When frozen, remove from the tray and pack in freezer-grade packaging. Frozen berries can be used in your favorite recipes, including pies, quick breads, smoothies, shortcake, and frozen berries can even be used to make your own homemade jams and jellies. When serving frozen fruits, serve them while there are still a few ice crystals in the fruit. This helps compensate for the mushy texture frozen fruits have when they are fully thawed. Fresh raspberries can also be preserved by canning in water, juice, or syrup using a boiling water bath to safely process. Raspberries also make a delicious jam or jelly. I encourage you to try a low or no sugar pectin product for jam or jelly making to help reduce the amount of added sugar you use. Also, consider preserving raspberries in homemade berry syrup to use on pancakes or flavored vinegars to jazz up salads or other vegetable dishes. Try dehydrating to make fruit leathers with Maine raspberries as well. There are many options for preserving raspberries so you can enjoy the flavor and nutritional benefits of Maine raspberries year-round. Maine Cooperative Extension is your go-to resource for the latest USDA recommendations for home canning and preserving. Check out our website for food preservation information, including hands-on preserving the harvest workshops near you, publications from our Let's Preserve series, books, pressure gauge testing services, and more. There are many options for preserving raspberries, so you can enjoy the flavor and nutritional benefits of Maine raspberries year-round.
One of the things we really like about this video is that it demonstrates that you can freeze fruits without sugar. And that's a question we field quite frequently here at Cooperative Extension. So it bears repeating, yes, you can freeze fruits and make jam without a whole lot of added sugar. So let's hear from Kathy a little bit about the science of freezing fruit.
Thanks, Lisa. So let's talk a bit about how freezing affects food. First off, a reminder that freezing does not sterilize foods. The extreme cold of your freezer simply slows the growth of microorganisms. Home freezers should be set at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. Enzymes in fruit can cause a browning of the fruit flesh and also a loss of vitamin C. Since fruits are usually served raw, they are not usually blanched like vegetables prior to freezing. So to control for the changes caused by the enzymes in the fruit, like browning, ascorbic acid is commonly used to prevent it. This slide shows an example of Fruit Fresh, which is one commercially available product that does help prevent with the browning of fruits. Quality can be an issue with home frozen foods. Ice crystals, off flavors, poor texture, these are oftentimes pitfalls that could ruin your frozen fruit. So remember, it's important to get a quick freeze when freezing fruit. A quick freeze means the ice that's forming inside the food will actually form a smaller ice crystal and keep the cell walls more intact. A long, slow freeze results in much larger ice crystals that rupture and damage the cell walls and ultimately affect the texture of your final product. More mush. Remember to freeze no more than 2 to 3 pounds of food for each cubic foot of freezer space within 24 hours. If you overload your freezer with a lot of unfrozen products, this can indeed result in that long, slow freezing process and then a poor quality product. Proper packaging will also help to avoid some of these issues, including freezer burn on your frozen fruit. Freezer burn is what happens to frozen foods when they are exposed to the dry freezer air. This exposure causes dehydration and oxidation, which again will affect lots of qualities about your food and color, texture, and flavor, to name a few. The food, however, is still safe to eat, but the quality may be poor. So remember to use those moisture and vapor-proof food grade packaging materials that are meant for the freezer to avoid these unpleasant results. We oftentimes get asked about ice crystals that are seen in frozen foods, and we want to remind you to not mistake ice crystals for freezer burn. Freezer burn looks very different than just plain ice crystals. Ice crystals commonly result when frozen foods have been exposed to fluctuating freezer temperatures. And again, this is not a food safety issue, but it could affect the quality. So now back to Lisa to hear more about freezer jams and jellies.
Thank you again, Kathy. So freezer jams are a simple and quick alternative to jams that are processed in a boiling water bath. This is a great project to do with your kids or grandkids. Keep in mind that these types of jams and jellies will have a much softer or looser set than the traditional ones. You can find low sugar pectins that can be used in the freezer. Just like with any jam making recipes, instructions need to be followed exactly. Otherwise, the jams may fail to set and will result in a syrupy-like consistency. You can use plastic freezer grade containers, or you can use 1/2 pint or 4-ounce canning jars with the 2-part lids. When you're ready to use these products, put them in the refrigerator so they can safely defrost. Once you've opened them, remember to refrigerate them and use them within 2 weeks. Otherwise, you can store in the freezer for up to a year. I think we're going to head over to the kitchen now and join Kate McCarty and talk more about creating those high-quality frozen fruits and fruit products.
Excellent. Thanks, Lisa. So I'm going to show you how to freeze peaches in a heavy syrup. So peaches are one of my favorite Maine fruits, and I just love them when they're ripe and in season, and I want to freeze them to enjoy them all year long. So to start, you want to pick your peaches and make sure that they are nice and ripe. That is really going to help you in this freezing process. And make sure that you handle them gently. So in the past, I've purchased them in bulk from a farmer. They come a little underripe, and I'll let them ripen on my counter for a few days. And then you want to set aside a fair amount of time, especially if you have a lot of peaches. Peaches in particular can be kind of time consuming to freeze. I once canned a whole case of peaches, and then I thought the following year that I would just freeze them because it would be much quicker and faster, but it wasn't. It took about the same amount of time. So to begin, you want to make sure that you wash your fruit really well. In general, we recommend washing fruit before you freeze it. You might see some advice to skip the wash step to help preserve quality while it's being frozen. But we think it's more important to have a ready-to-eat product that comes right out of the freezer, and you can use it in your granola in the morning or your smoothies, and you don't have to worry about doing that extra step of freezing. So peaches need to be peeled before they're frozen. So to peel a peach, you score the non-stem end by making a little X in it. And this is going to allow the peel to split when you put it in boiling water. So I have a little bit of boiling water here. I'll put the peach in for about 30 to 60 seconds. You just want to keep an eye on it. Again, you'll see the skin start to split. And this is where you want to make sure that your peaches are nice and ripe, so that the peel will come off easily. If they're not ripe, it won't come off very easily at all. And then I'll put the peaches in an ice bath while I continue to blanch the rest of my peaches. So some of the peaches I have in here, I have scored, and these are not very ripe, so now the peel is not going to be able to come off at all. In this case, you could, if you were determined to can or freeze this peach, you could use a little paring knife or even just your traditional peeler to get the peel off. But I do have one that was ripe and already blanched for you to demonstrate how it should come off nice and easy when you're using a ripe peach. So you can see the peel peels right away in these big strips. And when we get into canning tomatoes or freezing tomatoes, if you want to peel them, this is the same process. So you just go about this for a while, peeling off all the little peach skin bits until you have these perfectly nice slippery peaches. And then they go in what I've prepared ahead of time as an ascorbic acid dip. So again, I used that Fruit Fresh that Kathy recommended. And ascorbic acid is just vitamin C. So perhaps you have this in your home already and don't realize it. You don't necessarily need to go out and search out the commercial variety. This does have added sugar. So if you are looking to avoid sugar in your frozen fruit completely, you want to just use your vitamin C tablets. And we'll give you the recommendations for how many of those to crush up and how much water to create this dip. But I followed the instructions on the package to create my dip here. And then you can see I'm slicing my peaches into this. So this just hangs out while I work so that all these peaches slices don't start that unattractive browning while I'm working on preparing all of my peaches. So slice your peaches, slices right into it and let it hang out while you prep all your fruit. And then I've got a slotted spoon to help me fill up my containers. So the packaging is important, as Kathy reviewed, to help you avoid freezer burn. So you could use a rigid-sided container that's meant for the freezer, so a freezer grade plastic, or a glass jar. We recommend these wide mouth pint jars. And then you can see I've got the plastic storage cap, which is great for using in the freezer, compared to the 2-part metal lid. You'll just want to leave a little bit of headspace in these to allow for expansion in the freezer. What I'm going to do is use this rigid-sided container and then put my zip top bag inside of it to give it structure while I'm working. So then I've also prepared my simple syrup. So for peaches, it's recommended to use a heavy syrup. So that's about 40% syrup made up of 2 3/4 cups of sugar dissolved into 4 cups of water. So you could heat this gently, or you can just stir it until the sugar dissolves, and then refrigerate it so it's nice and cold before you add it to your peaches, your frozen fruit. So I'm going to fill my container about 2/3 full with the peach slices, just using that slotted spoon to remove them from my ascorbic acid dip. And then I'm going to cover them with the simple syrup, just about a 1/2 cup per pint. So I've got a 1/2 cup ladle actually, so we'll add 1 ladle full, see how far that gets us. Maybe 1 more, which makes sense. This is a quart bag, so we'll use about a cup of syrup. And then remove that gently out of the bag or out of the plastic container. I'm going to top it up with a little bit more syrup. Probably could add a few more peaches in here if I were at home too, but for our purposes, we're going to call this good. And this is where you want to get all the air out of it. Here comes that syrup. And then we'll lay it flat to freeze. So when we put this into the freezer, you want to, we'll have, of course, a bunch of these if we're doing a bunch of peaches. But you want to spread it out, all these bags out in the freezer so that they freeze evenly and quickly, rather than if they're all piled on top of each other, they would kind of insulate each other and give you that slow freeze we're looking to avoid. So lay them flat in the freezer, all spread out throughout the space, and make sure you don't overload the freezer. That will slow the freezing process down as well. The recommendation for how much you can freeze is 2 to 3 pounds of food per cubic foot of freezer space. That'll be all your appliance can handle. And then once your packages have frozen solid, then you can come back and organize the freezer if you want to group all of your frozen peaches together. So for our syrup, again, I used that heavy syrup. And so if you were at all like me, at first I paused a little at that because there are lots of options for different types of syrup. You can, of course, use ones that use less sugar, or you can freeze in juice. But it's actually recommended to freeze in a syrup that matches the sweetness of your fruit. So if you freeze it in something that's not as sweet, what will happen is the liquid will leach the natural sugars in the fruit out into that liquid until it kind of reaches that equilibrium. So by actually using a sweeter syrup, you're protecting the natural sweetness of the fruit. So you're not introducing any additional sugar. You can when you thaw these, you can drain them and drain off that additional syrup, but you are protecting the natural sweetness of the fruit. So you can see on our little chart there, there's different recommendations for different types of fruit, and we'll include this in your follow-up resource so you can make sure that you're picking the right syrup for your fruit. All right, that's it for freezing peaches in syrup. That was very quick compared to how long it would take you in real life, but it is worth it. So let's check in with Lori and see what questions you might have.
Well, it's kind of funny, but we don't have any questions just yet. Maybe folks can type them in and we can get back to them for sure. So I guess we will go back to Kathy.
Thanks, Lori. So once you've got a freezer full of the summer's bounty, what are some of those ways that you can use them? Here are a few suggestions. You can, in fact, make jam from frozen fruit. That is a question that we do get asked a lot. You can also use frozen fruit in baking. Think of those wonderful pies, quick breads, yummy desserts. You can use your frozen fruit to make shrubs. And those are the yummy drinking vinegars we discussed back in our June webinar. And you can also cook them down to make the fruit-based syrups. So fruits are high in water content and will get mushy when completely defrosted. So if you do plan to serve them as is, like in a fruit salad, it's best to serve them just as the ice crystals are disappearing. That way they'll hold their shape and have a firmer texture for a more pleasurable eating experience. So don't let them completely thaw. And when you are thawing them, remember to thaw them in the refrigerator in the package that they were frozen in. And remember to put them in a bowl to catch those juices that run off as they are thawing. So now, hopefully we've got Kate ready in the demo kitchen for, that was a quick turnaround, you're good. Kate back in the demo kitchen for another idea on how to use your frozen fruit. Why not make a fun and nutritious smoothie? Kate?
That's right. We are going to make this berry and green smoothie that's using previously frozen wild Maine blueberries. We're going to send this recipe to you. You might, I don't know if you're someone who feels like they need a recipe for a smoothie, but sometimes following a recipe will give you that real restaurant quality that we're all after in our home kitchens. So to start, I'm using 1 banana. It was sliced, and I did use some ascorbic acid to keep it from browning unattractively. And then 1 container of plain Greek yogurt, non-fat yogurt. And then 1.5 cups of greens. You could use spinach or kale. I personally find that kale doesn't really blend that well with the blender I have at home. So I opted to use spinach. My favorite of the two anyway. All right, not a lot happening on that step, so we're going to keep adding ingredients to get it to move along. This recipe has you add things and blend in between, which I'm sure would give you a great consistency, but without a lot of liquid, sometimes things don't move around in the blender. So we're going to add 1 cup of previously frozen blueberries. Because blueberries are so small, you can add them frozen, which will give you that nice cold consistency, as well as 1 cup of milk. Still nothing. So if you're like us and you don't have a high-powered blender, you might have to do a little more massaging with it. If you're someone who has splurged on one of those Vitamixes or something of the sort, you'll go right through it. All right, we've got movement now. My camera down so you can see a little. Got this beautiful purple smoothie. And Kathy and I were saying it'd be nice. We always think herbs add a great flavor. So if you have some herbs growing in the garden, we were thinking it'd be nice to add basil to this. So you can see the blueberries are really going to be center stage here with the bananas and give you that great sweetness. You can hardly tell there's a cup and a half of spinach in here, but it's got all those great nutrients in it. So cheers.
Thanks, Kate. Looks good. So if you are someone that makes your own fruit juice, remember that the freezer is a great place to store that instead of canning. Remember to leave plenty of headspace, because when things freeze, they do expand. Also remember that juices will take up a lot of space in your freezer, so plan ahead. Make sure the plans that you have for all the things you want to freeze will be able to allow for that extra volume that juice does take up in the freezer. We also want to remind you again that elderberry juice can only be stored in the frozen state. Due to some really recent research that has emerged, there are concerns around the pH, and it is in fact no longer recommended for canning. So we would like to check back in to see what you've learned so far. So we're going to launch our second poll and ask you which fruits that are listed below require an oxidation treatment prior to freezing. Now this, there is actually more than one right answer here, so please select all that apply. So go ahead and cast your vote there. And we'll give you about 10 more seconds. Place your vote. And then we'll go ahead and share those results. And it looks like folks were listening when Kate talked about using the antioxidant treatment on her peaches. And a reminder that yes, indeed, you are correct that the other light colored fruits that are listed here require that antioxidant treatment as well. So that includes apples and pears, and not so much for the plums and berries. Plums do tend to darken a little bit, but they're already a pretty dark fruit to begin with. And berries actually do not require an antioxidant treatment. So there's the results, and thanks so much for participating in that poll. We're going to move on and show you one of those great Mainly Dish videos from our FNEP colleagues, and another great idea on how to use frozen fruit. In this case, we're talking about how to use strawberries. thanks again to our UMaine FNEP colleagues for that video, and a reminder that you can check out more of their Mainly Dish videos by following them on Facebook or checking out their website. And we're now going to jump back to Lori for the Q&A box, and it looks like we do indeed have plenty of questions in there now.
We do. We have some awesome questions. The first one is, what is wrong with freezing without syrup?
There is nothing wrong with freezing without syrup. You may find that, so you can either freeze with syrup, you can freeze them as a dry pack, which means you just put some sugar on them, or you can freeze them as is. Recognize that different fruits have different qualities, and some of them will have ultimately, a different qualities as a frozen fruit. So you don't necessarily have to use the syrup.
Okay. Our next question is, I am very interested in low sugar jam. I have just found Pomona pectin and am concerned about the safety of using it. Also, there are so many books about canning with recipes. Can I assume they are all safe if the recipes are published?
So Pomona's pectin is a great no sugar needed pectin. So for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a different style of pectin than the other brands like Sure-Gel or Ball or Mrs. Wages. So it's made from citrus instead of apples, and it does not require the addition of sugar to help you achieve a set in your jams or jellies, which means that you can use any kind of sweetener you want, and it's just there for flavor. So you can use sugar if you want still, honey, maple syrup, juice, agave, or just no additional sugar and make an all fruit. It does come with a lot of recipes in the packaging. So typically if you're using a pectin, we recommend that you follow the recipes that come with it for the best success. And then actually a local woman, Alison Carol Duffy, who's one of our trained master food preserver volunteers, has published a branded cookbook with Pomona's called Preserving with Pomona's Pectin. And she has thoroughly tested all of those recipes to ensure that they're safe. But traditionally, we don't recommend that you purchase or that you use recipes in cookbooks unless they are from USDA, National Center for Home Food Preservation, or Ball. For beginner canners, as you become more experienced, you can certainly look over a cookbook. If they don't discuss in the beginning these same resources, then that should be a red flag. So for beginners, we advise you to stick to those resources so that you can become familiar with the principles of canning, the food safety aspect of it, and thoroughly understand where it's okay to make additions or subtractions. Like in the case of pickling, you can add spices for flavor, but a beginner canner might not be as comfortable making those substitutions safely. So while there are tons of beautiful cookbooks out there, it is difficult to stay away from them. We do recommend that you find one that uses those recommended resources. And you can always come to us if you have questions about a particular recipe.
Okay. Our next question is, how much headspace is needed for juices, peaches with syrup, etc., when freezing?
So it's safe to plan on a ½ inch to even up to 1 inch. And again, this isn't so much a food safety issue as it is in the home canning process, but more a concern around when things freeze, they do expand. And if it were to expand beyond the headspace that you allowed, you could actually rip the bag open in the case of a Ziploc bag, or if you used a plastic container, it could, perhaps burst that. Or in the case of a glass jar, if it had a narrow neck, it may in fact break the glass. So you do want to be mindful of that and allow a ½ inch to up to 1 inch for headspace for expansion.
Okay. So our next question is, when you say that peaches, apples, and pears require antioxidation treatments, do you mean require it for safety or rather require it to prevent browning? I'm asking because I was under the impression that browning was not an actual problem. It just looks unappetizing.
And you're absolutely right on that, Mark. It does simply look unappetizing. It's not a problem from a food safety standpoint. So it is an option for you to either treat, well, it's called pre-treating, your fruits with an antioxidant or not. And I also want to point out, those of you who may be, experienced cooks, know that lemon juice and even orange juice will both act as an antioxidant to prevent foods from turning brown. So, and they both are packed with plenty of ascorbic acid, right? Plenty of vitamin C in there. So those are some alternatives that people use to prevent the darkening. They are not as effective as the fruit fresh or straight up ascorbic acid, but they do ultimately provide the same prevention of browning.
Okay, we have one last question, and it's a follow-up to the previous question. It says, I hate synthetic sugars. I have just purchased the book Naturally Sweet Food in Jars, which cans using honey, maple, dried fruit, and things of that nature.
Yeah, so that's, I'm familiar with that book. It's by Marissa McClellan, who's a Philadelphia-based food writer, and she has certainly a great dedication to ensuring the safety of her recipes. We actually hosted her here in our office for a demo once. She made a peach sriracha jam and her dilly beans for her book event for the second book, I believe, Preserving by the Pint. So Marissa there is taking recipes that are research-based and adapting them to use those natural sweeteners. So that is something that I would feel comfortable recommending that you can use from a food safety standpoint. She just swaps in those alternative sweeteners for recipes that otherwise would call for copious amounts of white sugar. So that is a great resource as well.
Okay, that's all we have for questions for right now.
Mm-hmm. Great. We might also point out that some of those lower sugar jams and jellies may tend to have a shorter shelf life just because they don't have all that added sugar locking up all of the water availability in the jams and jellies. So that's just something to be mindful of. But just like Kate said, there are plenty of great options out there for using an alternative non-synthetic sweetener in your jams and jellies. So. And we've got plenty of resources here for you as well, and you'll get all of these in a follow-up email. And we also want to point out once again that if you're looking for places to find local fruit, our Maine agriculture colleagues have created a great interactive directory of the Maine Farm Product Directory, and you can find ways to shop at farms or even the great pick your own spots for berries that are open now. Be sure to visit the farm website or call first so you can learn about how their policies may have changed during COVID-19. Kate?
So we, along with the webinar series, have rolled out a new program this year. This is our Preserving Coach program. So this is an opportunity for newbie preservers to be matched with our Master Food Preserver volunteers for preserving advice throughout the growing season. So your preserving coach can provide advice by the phone, email, or maybe even in person if we're allowed. We have a handful of people enrolled, and we have still about twice as many volunteers who are interested in coaching someone throughout the season. So August, September are the month that it is really go time from a home food preservation standpoint here in Maine. So if you're a Maine resident and you're interested in your own personal preserving coach, send me an email at my email address there on your screen.
Great. Next week, we will be back Tuesday at 2 to discuss atmospheric steam canning. Now, this is a new way to process your acidic foods. Some new research has deemed this type of canning now safe. So we will spend a lot of time in the demo kitchen next week showing you all of the ins and outs of using an atmospheric steam canner to process your acidic foods. We will also be then advancing on to more things that are in season, including tomatoes and corn. and how to utilize your freezer to preserve those for year-round use. And then we'll jump ahead to everyone's favorite condiment, or a lot of people's favorite condiment, that's salsa, and then also other recipes for canning tomatoes. And we will be rolling through September and October, and we'll give you a little tickler as far as what our September topics will start off with, and that is indeed canning relish, so another popular topic. And we encourage you to check your email inbox after our webinar. There will be an email with upcoming information on registration, all the resources we've talked about, as well as any recipes from today's topic, and that information on how to be paired with a preserving coach. This week, something new, we still have the evaluation and the certificate of completion, but we are offering a refrigerator or freezer thermometer for those of you who complete the evaluation and provide us with your US mailing address. And this is something that can help you to know if you are indeed keeping your freezer at that recommended temperature that we've mentioned numerous times today, which is 0 degrees, to get the maximum quality out of your frozen foods. So again, please complete our evaluation and include your US mailing address, and we'll send you this free refrigerator or freezer thermometer to use in your home fridge. So I think we've got one more question in the Q&A box, Lori.
We do have one. And the question is there a list of books that you feel are safe, such as McClellan's book?
We've never developed a list of independent authors who have published books that we recommend. Again, we tend to stick to the USDA National Center for Home Food Preservation, so easy to preserve, the Ball Blue Book. Ball does have a new one out that was apparently, they partnered with a chef. So the recipes are a little bit more foodie than perhaps some of the more traditional homespun canning recipes that you might have seen out there. So Kathy, do you remember the name of it off the top of your head? It's the All New.
The All New or the New Ball book, but it is not like the Ball Blue books. It is a true book. Those other Ball Blue books to me look more like a magazine sort of reader. I would also point out, like you did earlier, about the Pomona's Pectin book, and that we could include a link to that in our resources.
Oh yeah, great idea.
Yep. So any other questions in the box, Lori?
We don't have any. That's all of them.
All right. Well, we'd like to say thank you to all of you for joining us today. And we hope to see you next week and in the following weeks to discuss more on preserving the Maine harvest. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.